And hello, and welcome one and all to the Slam Jam Wrestling Podcast with me, your host, David Postansky. And wow, it has been just over 24 hours since AEW Blood and Guts. And what an event that was. It was obviously an episode of AEW Dynamite, but AEW, they only do a few traditional pay-per-views each year, and instead they will pump up occasional episodes of Dynamite of being pay-per-view quality events, and this was one of them. Now, if you don't remember, the history of this event was that a year ago we were a week off of getting Blood and Guts, AEW's answer and version of War Games, The Match Beyond, and the pandemic hit and it was postponed. They did the Stadium Stampede instead, but then it's taken them until a year later. So instead of getting the Inner Circle against the Elite, stories have moved on. The Inner Circle are now babyfaces and the Elite are now heels. And instead of just reversing the fortunes there of who's going against who, the storyline has become the Inner Circle versus Pinnacle. And was this a really good match? I can say straight away, it was very good. Overall, there was one major thing that people on the internet have been going over the top, I believe. Over the top in their reaction to it, although my initial reaction I think was much the same as what a lot of the reaction I'm seeing online is, and we'll come to that in a moment. But overall, this was a very good War Games match. Is it the best War Games match that I've ever seen? I don't know. Like, it didn't instantly strike me as being the best War Games match. It was definitely more of an AEW match than what you would see in WWE. Obviously, NXT have done War Games, and we haven't had a War Games in the main roster on WWE, but we do get them in NXT. And this was very good. I would say that this isn't necessarily better than the NXT War Games, but it certainly wasn't what I'd say is instantly that I thought of as worse. You know, it followed the exact same format of 2 teams of 5 going in one at a time, like 2 start, 1 from each team. Then always usually, I think, a heel comes in next, then a face, then a heel, then a face, till everyone's in. And once everyone is in, then you can have a decision, and it can come via surrender or via submission. And we started off, I think it got Dax Harwood and it had got Sammy Guevara in there, and they go for about 4 or 5 minutes, and then we brought in whoever came in next. I can't remember actually. Was it Jake Hager? I can't remember. No, it wasn't Jake Hager. He's on the Inner Circle, who are now the baby faces, as I said. Do you know, we ended up with like a few of them in. We ended up with, I think, did we have both Cash Wheeler and Dax Harwood in? I think we did, in fact, at the beginning. Then we got Santana. Then, soon after this, we had Sean Spears come in. There was a crazy spot where Sammy Guevara and Sean Spears both ended up on the middle, section of the ring on the 2 ropes, and they sort of had to grab each other's arms just to steady themselves, and then Guevara put it into some big flip, and there was lots of moments like this. I think not that long after that. It was early in the match. I think Sammy Guevara completely botched something on the middle rope, just jumping across. And this is the major thing about AEW. You can't blame them that they're so ambitious, but they're so ambitious that occasionally they have misses as well as their hits. So this is one of the things with WWE, is that WWE will have things that go wrong, but AEW, they try to do things which are always innovative ideas that haven't been done before, and occasionally there'll be botches come out of it. And it's a shame, because I think a lot of the internet wrestling community will just remember the things that have perhaps gone wrong, whereas the bit with Sammy Guevara and Sean Spears where they're on the middle ropes and they're brawling, punching back and forth, and it ends up going into, is it a Spanish fly? I think Guevara hit on Spears. Clearly, that moment worked out, but clearly there was a element of they were rickety on the ropes and that could have gone wrong. And then just like a minute later, like Guevara went for something and he really didn't quite hit his target, jumping off at Dax. He just completely botched it and landed like completely face first. So whatever they were going for didn't quite come to pass. Later on, the moment where we got Jake Hager in there and we got Wardlow in there, and it was like, right, so these are the Bizarro world and the Good World version of each other. So these are like the two big hoss fight wrestlers getting in there. And I always feel that with Jake Hager that they've made a little bit of a mistake. They've always put him over as like this guy that can be beaten up a bit more than he should have been. When he first debuted in AEW, he could have been AEW's Brock Lesnar because he's the MMA fighter. He'd got like a couple of wins under his belt, and it could just be like, well, no one can touch him. And instead they had him like bumping and selling for people, and they couldn't decide if he was just going to talk or not going to talk, because he was sort of had the gimmick of where he wouldn't say anything, and then he came out with a goat. But anyway, this isn't my point. The point is that they should be using Hagar just as an absolute beast. And when I say beast, there's no pun intended on Brock Lesnar. But they had Hagar getting a little bit too much dominated by Wardlow. And again, Wardlow had, like, I think the first Wardlow match in AEW may legitimately have been his cage match. So what would have been the previous cage match that AEW did before Blood and Guts last night, because I don't think they've done any in between. Or unless, was the Britt Baker match, was that a cage match, or was that just a no holds barred? I can't remember, to be honest. I don't think it was a cage match. Maybe it was. But no, it definitely wouldn't have been. But anyway, regardless of this, so Wardlow had that match, and he, hasn't been a prominent continual wrestler. One thing that was interesting on this event was just that there was space around the edge of the cage, so occasionally you'd get wrestlers that would just fall in between the cage and the ring, and that feels like not what I remember seeing in WCW. This isn't like Hell in a Cell where there is space for them to walk around the ring. It's just that the cage wasn't quite fitted to the ring, which meant that bumping into the cage seemed a bit dodgy. And just as the match went on, it was just like good action. Like loads of them got busted open. I think was it Dax got split open. Guevara got, I think, a little bit of juice here or there. Obviously, MJF was split open a lot, and it was a good show. It wasn't perhaps the cleanest fight, but this thing is, it's meant to be a fight, and they did achieve that. They made it really feel like these guys went to war with each other, which for war games is what you want. A couple of other minor points, and it does feel like I'm speaking about like the things where I'm critical of it, whereas that's not quite my intention. It's just that when something's got a lot of good, and then there's just a few things that maybe bring it down a notch or two here or there, they're the things which you can pick apart. But that doesn't take away the fact that overall I really enjoyed it. We did have it so that one thing that was interesting was that you'd see the cameramen inside the support beams, and because there was one right in the middle of the ring, which was obviously essential to being able to film inside the ring, when they'd do stuff in between the two rings in the two middle ropes, you would kind of not be able to see past the cameraman. And there was just one bit where there was like a split where there was all of the Inner Circle in one ring, all of Pinnacle on the other ring, and then it's like, right, we're having like the Avengers or like Captain America Civil War standoff where there's Team Captain America and Team Iron Man facing off. It's like, right, the time for talking is over, now we're going to run at each other and fight. And they all ran and jumped into the middle, but because they were filming from outside the ring straight on, it meant that we couldn't actually see the moment where they all connected. Jericho was interesting though, just because, like, the smartest one, he was just like ran and went through the ropes rather than trying to jump over it and jump someone. But again, just like the idea that MJF and then I think Jericho came in last for each team, like the team captains came in last. It meant that things could build up until we got their interaction all together. And then this would lead to the standoff that I mentioned about, where all of the Inner Circle were in the right-hand ring and all of Pinnacle were in the left-hand ring. And it's just like this sense of regrouping, and it was good in the sense that this was like a reset in the match. It's like, right, now the battle line have been drawn, and they could all just build up this moment, because it was one of the first times where we've had well, I think this may be the first time where we had a full crowd for what they're allowed, at least at AEW. So this was the biggest crowd they've had in a long time, and the crowd were really into this. And then when just everyone went everywhere, where they were like just pairing off into their brawl, it was like the feel that you'll get one in a Royal Rumble, but obviously in a War Games as well. Bringing like weapons or whatever that they got into it. Jericho came in with something or other, like a bat or what have you. But what was a little bit odd is just that obviously if you're watching live, they'd occasionally go to picture-in-picture on the commercials, and at one point it just came back and they were like ripping up the ring, and I don't know, I think that just happened in picture-in-picture, or I just completely missed it. And it was just interesting because I didn't think that they did the best use of the ripping up the padding on the ring. Doing something like that, it reveals that yes, there is this layer of foam, there is some padding, and then the boards, and I think everyone like understands, and no one's going to be too harsh on that. But just the idea of like going for the pile drivers onto the boards without the padding, it's just like, well, then when they do a pile driver, normally there is the padding, but the double spike pile driver with Sammy Guevara, it was an effective spot. It's definitely something they can use in the highlight reel, but I completely missed whatever happened with the top rope getting broken. And eventually I think it then went to another commercial break, and we came back, and suddenly Jericho was on the top of the ring with MJF. And I think like this was when you saw it live. When you watched the replay, obviously you could see how this came about. But Jericho goes up there, and it was good. One thing that I was quite pleased about, because obviously it's a very high cage that they've got in AEW. If you watch the old WCW War Games, there is like a famous clip where I think Brian Pillman gets powerbombed by Sid, and just as Sid, because obviously Sid's 6'10", when he's powerbombing him, he just like smacks Brian Pillman onto the top of the cage, and then to powerbomb him below. Whereas this, it was almost like they'd bought the old double or triple decker cage from WCW and just taken out the floors in between. So Jericho climbing up this height, we knew that something was going to happen, and it seemed a really solid cage on top. So unlike when you think of the Hell in the Cell in the WWE, how Mick Foley ended up falling through it, and you'd see it just bow under and like buckle under their weight. This was a proper platform that you can walk on when you're on the top. And just Jericho and MJF up there, MJF going up to the top of the cage to escape Jericho. It's just like, why would you go into a place where it's really dangerous, where there's nothing to stop anyone from just following you up there? And, Jericho doing... It's a funny thing, really, because Jericho doing the Walls of Jericho onto MJF on the top of the cage, it's like, well, that's exactly the same as him doing it in the ring. You could say that just his midsection is rubbing against the metal, and is that worse than rubbing against the ring mat? But it's still effective as a visual. And again, for the highlight reel, just to show them on top of this cage and the submission hold, this would obviously be a big moment, but MJF quickly after the Walls of Jericho managed to get the upper hand. I think there may have been a low blow or something. And this was an interesting piece of booking, which, again, coming back to what they would have done last year, what would have they actually planned? Because I feel like this would have been the ending a year ago, but obviously that would have been Jericho going to throw Cody off the top rope, for example. But instead, this was MJF going to throw Jericho off the top rope. And why no one else could get out to the outside to help him, like we saw Santana and Ortiz starting to climb up. Why, like Sammy Guevara, just down below, saying like, no, I surrender, don't throw him. He could have run there and been like, well, I'm just going to catch him. So, how many times do they go outside and just get everyone piled up to catch them? MJF could have easily... He could have, grabbed Jericho by the hair and he's like, look, if you're going to catch him, then I'm going to just run him off and throw him the other direction so that no matter what, if you don't surrender, I'm going to throw him off. So, Guevara protects Jericho, which again, I love the relationship they've built up between Guevara and Jericho, even just dating back to right at the beginning with it, where there was the Photoshop of them on holiday together and they're hugging face to face. It really is, again, coming back to the Avengers, and I apologise for this, that Spider-Man, Iron Man relationship where Jericho is the mentor and then the younger Sammy Guevara, is looks up to him, has got utter respect. But then, after the match ended, it just felt far too long, where Jericho wasn't that defenseless. We saw him talking to MJF at a certain point, and then there was still another minute before he threw him off. And just the fact that you could see it, to me, maybe I'm wrong on this, but it just the metal was either so flimsy, or I thought, is that actually just printed paper or something a sticker that's got texture on it to make it look like he's landing on metal, but that's actually just very thin pieces of cardboard. It didn't look like he'd really smashed through metal. We could see the crash mat. Occasionally we could see Jericho looking to people and all of the trainers and everything gathering round as MJF looked on. It didn't look that high. Now, obviously a few months ago we had Matt Hardy take a absolutely awful bump against Sammy Guevara, in fact, where he just cracked his head on the concrete when they jumped off of a scissor lift, and everyone was like, oh my god, this is terrible, Matt Hardy could have been killed, he was instantly knocked out, and then they continued the match and we shouldn't have done that, and Tony Khan had to defend himself a lot. So yeah, have better safety precautions. Lots of people on the internet have said that this moment ruined the whole match. It was a shame, just especially after the exploding death match had a little bit of a massively botched ending with the explosions not going off. To have this where the last moment of it didn't feel like it quite hit what it was supposed to, just in terms of the visual, is a shame, but it doesn't take away from that overall this was a war. Jericho was busted open. MJF was crimson at the end of the match. It'll be interesting to see where this goes, because yes, this does really solidify that pinnacle of this big deal, and MJF is cowardly that he won because he was threatening to throw Jericho off the top, and then he did it anyway. But what happens to the Inner Circle after this? Just because even if Jericho's a face, which Jericho can easily be a face, Sammy Guevara is so much better as a cocky heel, and Santana and Ortiz, they feel a lot more heelish, and Jake Hager is just he's a heel. They're all heels. It's just Jericho that isn't a heel. I mean, they're kind of the cool heels, but they're still heels. And so what do they do now? There's not another 5-man team for them to feud with. And so just with MJF, unless he's going to be going for the world title soon, which he isn't if Kenny Omega's still the world champion, then it's where do they go from here? If the heels had lost, if Jericho's team of the Inner Circle had won, then there may have been somewhere for some sort of after the match, Jericho beats MJF, but then MJF throws him off the top, and it's now we've got a reason to continue this feud. Jericho could be off TV for a while, and then they could just have the rest of the Inner Circle trying to take on the outnumbered Pinnacle, especially with, I mean, who else have they got in it? So there's Wardlow, there's FTR, Sean Spears, and Tully Blanchard, I suppose. So, they do have like the numbers advantage, especially if you take away Jericho as well. And it could be that they're continuing to cause havoc, but just with the Elite there as well, what do you do? Because with the Elite, you've got Kenny Omega, you've got the Young Bucks, you've got the Good Brothers, and it is just the Bullet Club. And so you're not going to have the Pinnacle. You're not going to have Pinnacle against the Elite anytime soon. And since the Young Bucks especially have just turned heel, it really doesn't work to try and turn them babyface. And MJF, you literally just can't turn babyface. So that would be a huge mistake at any time in the near future. He needs to be a heel run as a world champion before they even consider doing anything to the contrary with him. But anyway, I would say overall this was a really fun match to watch. It was great to see this historic moment for AEW to have their first War Games match, their first Blood and Guts match that they've had in their company. And I will be very interested to see what comes next. Like on the rest of Dynamite, obviously they gave the big tease that next week it will have the match which will decide Orange Cassidy to be the number one contender against Kenny Omega, even though that obviously Pac is the other entity there. Pac is someone that feels like, from when he was first getting involved, he said, I'm going to be the AEW World Champion, and then obviously he had to take a back step away from being involved in the beginning of AEW. And he's never really quite got back into the picture yet, but just with them pushing that Orange Cassidy versus Kenny Omega seems more likely after this build-up we've had with them confronting each other with Tony Schiavone in between. It feels like that Kenny Omega is going to retain, and yeah, so I don't envisage that Orange Cassidy has the chance of becoming world champion. And it'll be interesting just because it doesn't feel like Orange Cassidy could be a world champion yet. Maybe in the future, but just when you've got him matched up with Kenny Omega, who Mr. 6-star match, Mr. Best in the world, IWGP, TNA, AAA Mega Champion, AEW Champion, and then there's Orange Cassidy, who's not wrestled that many matches in AEW, doesn't really do much microphone work, doesn't do much in-ring stuff until it's like the big fight. It would feel weird for him to be the person to dethrone Kenny. But anyway, this is my thoughts on AEW Dynamite Blood and Guts. This has been the Slam Jam Wrestling Podcast, so make sure you do hit that subscribe button, whichever platform you are listening to this on. If it's on either Spreaker or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, etc., make sure you click subscribe on your favourite platform. You can also hear this show on youtube.com/Extreme Improv, so make sure you smash the subscribe button there, because that will really help the channel and the shows grow. If you haven't seen it already, check out our weekly wrestling-themed comedy panel show, which is the Slam Jam Show, which mixes trivia along with improv and other silly wrestling challenges. But for now, my name is David Postansky, and until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now.